The morning light filtered through my kitchen window the same way it had for 32 years, casting familiar shadows across the oak table where Caroline and I used to share our coffee. I sat alone now, same chair, same chipped blue mug, the one she'd refused to throw away because it gives things character, she'd say, running her thumb over the imperfection like she did with everything broken that still had use left in it. Outside, the October air carried the scent of wood smoke from someone's burn pile, mixing with the faint smell of motor oil that seemed permanently embedded in my clothes. 40 years of running Dalton's Auto Repair had left its mark on everything I owned, including the skin under my fingernails that never quite came clean. I wrapped my fingers around the warm porcelain and looked out at the backyard Caroline had spent so many summers perfecting. The maple she'd planted the year Ethan was born had grown tall enough now to shade half the deck, its leaves just beginning to turn that deep red she'd loved. The garden beds she'd tended with such care were starting their autumn retreat, the last of the mums holding their ground against the coming frost. This house had been our everything. We'd bought it young and broke, spent weekends sanding floors and painting walls, learning as we went. Caroline would hold the flashlight while I wrestled with stubborn plumbing, and I'd steady the ladder when she insisted on hanging wallpaper in the front hallway herself. Every room held our fingerprints, our choices, our small victories over projects that had seemed too big for our bank account. The garage still housed my tools, the good ones I'd collected over decades, each wrench and socket earning its place through honest work. My customers knew they could count on Dalton's for a fair price and work that lasted. I'd built that reputation one transmission rebuild at a time, one satisfied customer telling another. Even now, 3 years into what I generously called retirement, neighbors still knocked on my door when their cars made sounds they didn't recognize. Caroline's presence lingered in every corner. Her reading glasses still sat on the side table next to her crossword puzzle books. The kitchen timer, shaped like a rooster that she'd insisted would add personality, still ticked from the counter. Her coffee mug, the good china one with tiny roses, remained in the cabinet, untouched since the morning she didn't wake up to use it. 3 years. Some days it felt like 30, others like 30 minutes. The silence had a weight to it now. Not uncomfortable exactly, but substantial. I'd learned to fill it with routines, coffee at 6, newspaper spread across the table, checking the locks before bed. Simple things that marked the passage of time without demanding too much attention. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Caller ID showed Ethan's name, and for a moment, my chest tightened with that old hope that maybe this call would be different. Maybe this time he'd ask how I was feeling instead of what he needed. "Morning, Dad." His voice carried that tone I'd grown to recognize, friendly on the surface, but with an undercurrent of purpose. "Ethan." I kept my voice neutral. "How are Madison and the kids?" "Good, good." "Listen, Dad, Madison and I were talking, and we think it might be time to sit down and discuss your situation." My situation. As if being 72 and living alone in the house I'd owned for 3 decades was a problem that needed solving. "What kind of situation would that be?" "Well, the house is getting to be a lot for one person. All those rooms, the maintenance, the property taxes. We're just thinking there might be better options." I set my mug down carefully, watching steam rise from the dark surface. "Better for who?" "For everyone. Look, Dad, I know you're attached to the place, but it's not like you're using all that space. And with property values the way they are right now, it might be smart to cash in while the market's hot." Cash in. Like 32 years of marriage and memories were a stock portfolio that needed optimizing. "I appreciate the concern," I said, "but I'm managing just fine." "Are you, though? When's the last time you had anyone look at the furnace? Or check the roof? These old houses, they nickel and dime you to death if you're not careful." The house wasn't old. We'd built it ourselves, choosing every board and fixture. I knew every pipe and wire in the walls because I'd watched them go in. But to Ethan, anything that existed before his birth qualified as ancient. "The house is solid," I said. "Your mother and I didn't cut corners." "I'm not saying you did. I'm just saying things change. Maybe it's time to be practical about this." Practical. Another word that had taken on new meaning since Caroline died. In Ethan's vocabulary, practical meant anything that made his life easier, regardless of how it affected mine. "Tell you what," he continued when I didn't respond. "Why don't Madison and I come over this weekend? We can walk through the place, maybe look at some numbers. Her parents might join us. They've got experience with this kind of transition. The mention of Madison's parents sent a chill through me. Gerald and Patricia Monroe had never quite figured out how to look at me without disappointment, as if Caroline's choice to marry a mechanic instead of the doctor or lawyer they'd envisioned had been a personal affront to their family's trajectory. "That's not necessary," I said. "Dad, we're just trying to help. You can't stay isolated forever. Mom wouldn't want that." And there it was, the card he'd learned to play whenever I showed resistance. Mom wouldn't want this, Mom would have wanted that, as if he'd suddenly become the expert on what Caroline would have wanted for me. "I'll think about it," I said, which we both knew meant no. "Great, we'll plan on Saturday afternoon, around 2. Madison's excited to see you." He hung up before I could object, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand. Excited to see me. More likely excited to appraise my assets and explain why letting go would be the mature thing to do. I walked through the house slowly, seeing it through their eyes, instead of mine. The hardwood floors I'd refinished myself suddenly looked dated instead of classic. The kitchen Caroline had planned so carefully seemed cramped rather than cozy. The living room where we'd hosted Christmas mornings and birthday parties felt oversized for one old man rattling around alone. But they were wrong about one thing. I wasn't isolated. Mrs. Patterson from across the street still brought me her famous apple pie every few months, usually with some neighborhood gossip attached. Tom Bradley down the block, and I traded tools and conversation whenever one of us had a project going. The mailman, Jerry, always took time to ask about my health and share updates about his granddaughter's college applications. This wasn't isolation. This was home. In my study, I pulled out the filing cabinet where Caroline had kept our important papers organized with her characteristic precision. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, investment statements, all the documentation of a life lived responsibly. I found what I was looking for in a folder labeled estate planning. The power of attorney documents we'd signed during Caroline's final illness. My hands trembled slightly as I read through the papers. I'd given Ethan broad authority to make financial decisions if I became incapacitated, a precaution that had seemed reasonable when Caroline was dying and I was barely holding myself together. The language was comprehensive, covering everything from banking to real estate transactions. I'd forgotten how extensive the powers were, or maybe I'd chosen not to remember. Setting the papers aside, I made my way to the garage, needing the comfort of familiar tools and the smell of motor oil. My workbench stood exactly as I'd left it, every tool in its designated place. This was where I thought clearly, where problems had solutions and progress could be measured. The Buick sat in its usual spot, 40-year-old steel that still ran like a dream because I'd maintained it properly. Unlike some things in my life, it had never surprised me with hidden problems or betrayed my trust in its fundamental soundness. I was adjusting the tension on a fan belt that didn't really need adjusting when I heard tires on gravel. Through the garage window, I watched a silver Mercedes pull into my driveway. Not Ethan's usual truck, but something newer and more expensive. Madison stepped out first, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the October breeze, followed by a man I didn't recognize carrying what looked like a briefcase. The third person to emerge made my stomach tighten. Gerald Monroe, Madison's father, moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. He wore what I'd learned to call his serious business expression, the one he'd worn when explaining to Caroline and me why we shouldn't waste money on the church wedding we wanted because a simple ceremony would be more fiscally responsible. I closed the garage door and walked through the house to meet them at the front door, taking my time. They could wait on my porch until I was ready. "Dad!" Madison's smile was bright and aggressive, the kind perfected in real estate offices and political campaigns. "We brought someone we'd like you to meet." The stranger stepped forward with practiced confidence. "Mr. Dalton, I'm James Crawford from Heritage Financial Services. Your son and daughter-in-law asked me to take a look at your property situation and see if we might be able to help you maximize your options." Options. Another word that had become weaponized in conversations about my future. "I didn't realize I had a property situation," I said. Gerald cleared his throat with the subtle authority of a man accustomed to managing other people's decisions. "Richard, we're all family here. We want what's best for everyone, and sometimes that means taking a step back and looking at things objectively. I invited them in because Caroline had raised me to be polite, even when politeness felt like surrender. They arranged themselves in my living room like a tribunal, Crawford opening his briefcase with theatrical precision, while Madison fussed over imaginary dust on the coffee table. Now then, Crawford began, spreading papers across the surface Caroline had polished by hand every Sunday for 30 years. I've done a preliminary assessment based on comparable sales in your neighborhood, and I think you'll be pleased with what the market could offer. The numbers meant nothing to me. They were just figures designed to make abandoning my life sound financially prudent. Of course, Gerald added, you'd need to consider the tax implications, the cost of finding suitable alternative housing, and the emotional adjustment. But financially speaking, this could set you up very comfortably for your remaining years. Remaining years. As if my life were winding down like an old clock, and the smart thing to do was sell the parts while they still had value. Madison leaned forward with practiced sympathy. Dad, we know this is hard, but you've got to think practically. This house is too big, too expensive to maintain. You could get a nice little apartment somewhere, maybe one of those senior communities with activities and people your own age. People my own age. Warehoused together like cars that were still functional, but no longer fashionable. I appreciate everyone's concern, I said carefully, but I'm not interested in selling. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Crawford shuffled his papers with diplomatic efficiency, while Gerald's expression shifted from patience to something cooler. Richard, Gerald said, his voice taking on the tone he probably used with subordinates who weren't grasping obvious concepts. Perhaps you're not seeing the full picture here. The carrying costs alone, property taxes, utilities, maintenance, they add up quickly for someone on a fixed income. My income isn't fixed. I still do repair work. But for how long? Madison's voice carried genuine concern mixed with something else. Frustration, maybe, that I wasn't recognizing their generosity in solving my problems for me. What happens when you can't work anymore? What happens if you get sick or hurt yourself trying to maintain this place? What happens was the question that haunted every conversation about my future, as if turning 72 meant I'd suddenly become incapable of making rational decisions about my own life. I'll face those problems when they arrive, I said, not before. Crawford spoke up with the smooth confidence of a man who'd handled resistant clients before. Mr. Dalton, I understand your attachment to this property, but sometimes the smartest thing we can do is plan ahead. Make changes while we're in control, rather than waiting for circumstances to force our hand. Circumstances? Another euphemism for the inconvenient reality that I might actually live in my own house until I died. Gerald leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating gaze of a man trying to determine my price. You know, Richard, there might be middle ground solutions here, options that let you stay in the house while still addressing the financial realities. The word options again, but this time it carried a different weight. I felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, like the moment when you realize a friendly conversation has become a negotiation. What kind of options? I asked, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Crawford opened a different folder, pulling out documents that looked more official than his earlier marketing materials. Well, there are various arrangements we could structure, reverse mortgages, for instance, or equity partnerships that would allow you to remain in residence while accessing the property's value. Madison nodded enthusiastically. It's perfect, Dad. You get to stay in the house, but you also get access to cash for anything you need. Medical expenses, home improvements, travel, whatever makes you happy. Happy. As if happiness were something that could be purchased with the equity from the house Caroline and I had built together. How exactly would that work? I asked. Gerald and Crawford exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Well, Gerald said, the specific details would depend on the arrangement, but essentially you'd be partnering with an investment group that specializes in these kinds of situations. What kind of investment group? Professional property managers, Crawford said smoothly. People who understand the market and can help you maximize your return while minimizing your risk. The language was getting smoother and more evasive with each answer. Professional property managers who would help me maximize my return on the house I already owned, free and clear. And what would happen to the house after I'm gone? I asked. Another glance between Gerald and Crawford. Madison reached over and patted my hand with practiced sympathy. Dad, let's not worry about that right now. The important thing is making sure you're comfortable and secure for as long as possible. But I was beginning to understand that the arrangement they were describing would ensure I was the last person in my family to benefit from the house Caroline and I had spent our lives paying for. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting the sudden movement. I think I need some time to process all this. Of course, Crawford said, gathering his papers with efficient disappointment. These are big decisions, but, Richard, may I call you Richard? I'd encourage you not to wait too long. Market conditions change, and opportunities like this don't stay available indefinitely. Opportunities. As if giving up my home were a limited-time offer I'd be foolish to refuse. They left with promises to follow up, and reminders that they were only trying to help. Madison kissed my cheek with the cool affection of a daughter-in-law who'd learned to perform intimacy without feeling it. Gerald shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who expected his advice to be taken. After their car pulled away, I stood in my living room and looked at the indentations their shoes had left in Caroline's carefully maintained carpet. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. They'd brought papers and proposals into my house, filled my air with talk of equity partnerships and professional property managers. But most unsettling of all, they'd spoken as if these decisions were inevitable, as if my resistance was just a temporary obstacle to be managed rather than respected. I walked back to my study and pulled out the power of attorney documents again, reading them more carefully this time. The language was broad, covering almost every aspect of financial decision-making. I'd signed them when Caroline was dying, and I was barely functional with grief, trusting that Ethan would use the authority only if I became truly incapacitated. But looking at them now, I realized how much power I'd given away, and how easy it would be for someone to use that power before I was ready to surrender it. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of wood and brick that had sheltered Caroline and me through 32 years of marriage. In the kitchen, her coffee mug waited in the cabinet. In the bedroom, her pillow still held the faint scent of her lavender shampoo. This wasn't just a house. It was the repository of every choice we'd made together, every dream we'd built, every small victory we'd celebrated. Crawford and Gerald could reduce it to square footage and market value, but they couldn't quantify what it meant to fall asleep every night, surrounded by the life I'd chosen. I made myself a sandwich I didn't particularly want and sat at the kitchen table, watching shadows move across the backyard as clouds passed overhead. Tomorrow, I decided I would make some phone calls. I would talk to people who understood the difference between legal advice and predatory guidance. And I would find out exactly what professional property managers and equity partnerships really meant when applied to a 72-year-old man living alone in the house his wife had loved. Because whatever game they were playing, I was beginning to suspect I wasn't supposed to win. Where are you watching this video from? Leave your location. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken by the kind of restless thoughts that circle like vultures around something that's not quite dead yet. I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying Crawford's smooth words and Gerald's calculating glances, searching for the pieces of the conversation that didn't fit together quite right. At 5:30, I gave up on sleep and made coffee in the gray pre-dawn light. The ritual felt more necessary than usual. The precise measurement of grounds, the familiar hiss of the machine, the smell that had marked the beginning of every day Caroline and I had shared. Some mornings, I still set out 2 cups before remembering. I was reading yesterday's newspaper for the second time when the phone rang. Ethan again, earlier than his usual calls. Dad, I hope I didn't wake you. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's meeting. I'm up, I said. Have been for a while. Good. Listen, I've been thinking about what Crawford said, and I really think this could be the perfect solution. You get to stay in the house, you get access to cash, and everyone wins. Everyone wins. The phrase had the hollow ring of something rehearsed. Tell me more about this investment group, I said. Oh, they're very reputable. Crawford's worked with them on dozens of similar arrangements. Elderly homeowners who want to age in place but need financial flexibility. Elderly homeowners. As if reaching 72 had automatically enrolled me in a category of people who needed other people to make their decisions. What's the name of this group? A pause, brief but noticeable. I'd have to ask Crawford for the specific details. He handles all the corporate relationships. But Dad, The important thing is that this solves all your problems. Problems I didn't know I had until yesterday afternoon. Ethan, can I ask you something? Sure. When's the last time you visited this house just to spend time with me? Not to discuss my situation or my options or my problems, but just to sit on the porch and talk. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Dad, that's not fair. You know I've been busy with work, and the kids have their activities, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just trying to understand when my life became a problem that needed solving instead of something worth visiting. Look, I know this is emotional for you. The house has a lot of memories, but sometimes you have to put emotions aside and think practically. Practically. There was that word again. The one that seemed to mean giving up everything important to make other people's lives more convenient. I'll think about it, I said, which we both knew meant I wouldn't. After he hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and tried to remember the last time Ethan had come over without an agenda. The last time he'd asked about my health instead of my finances, my happiness instead of my housing situation. The answer was harder to find than it should have been. By 8 o'clock, I was in my garage, seeking the clarity that came from working with my hands. I had a 1973 Chevelle that had been sitting in the corner for 2 years, a project I'd promised myself I'd finish when I had time. Today seemed like the right day to start. I was adjusting the carburetor when I heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. Through the side window, I saw a familiar figure approaching, Marcus Lee, my lawyer for the past 20 years, and one of the few people left who remembered Caroline the way she really was. "Richard," he called out. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by." Marcus was 75, but moved like a man 20 years younger, his mind still sharp enough to cut glass. He'd handled our wills, our property transfers, and the legal details when Caroline died. More importantly, he'd never once suggested that my age made me incompetent to make my own decisions. "Marcus, what brings you out this way?" He stepped into the garage, looking around at the organized chaos of tools and projects. "Got an interesting call yesterday afternoon. Someone asking questions about your property, whether there were any liens or encumbrances that might complicate a transaction." My hands stilled on the wrench I was holding. "What kind of someone?" "Paralegal from Heritage Financial Services. Said they were doing due diligence for a potential client arrangement." Marcus leaned against the workbench, his expression serious. "Richard, you thinking about selling?" "Not exactly, but I had some visitors yesterday who seemed to think I should be." I told him about Crawford's visit, Gerald's pointed questions, and Ethan's sudden concern for my financial welfare. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Richard," he said when I finished, "you need to be very careful here. What they're describing sounds like one of those equity-sharing arrangements, and they're not always what they seem." Meaning you could end up signing over a significant portion of your property value while retaining all the responsibilities of ownership. And if something happens to you, the investment group could end up with your house, while your heirs get whatever's left after fees and administrative costs. The wrench slipped in my hand, clattering against the engine block. "How is that legal?" "It's legal because it's all disclosed in the fine print. The part they don't emphasize is how the math works out in the end." Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through some notes. "I did a little research after that call yesterday. Heritage Financial Services has been involved in at least a dozen similar arrangements in the past 2 years. In most cases, the homeowner ends up with significantly less equity than they expected. And the families often find themselves with no inheritance and no legal recourse." Marcus met my eyes. "Richard, do you still have that power of attorney you signed when Caroline was sick?" The question hit me like cold water. "Yes. Why?" "Because depending on how it's written, Ethan might be able to enter into these arrangements without your explicit consent. Have you looked at it recently?" I hadn't. I'd signed it in a haze of grief and medical appointments, trusting that my son would use it only if I became unable to make decisions for myself. "We need to review those documents," Marcus said. "Today, if possible." An hour later, we were sitting in Marcus's office while he read through the power of attorney papers with the careful attention of a man who understood how much damage careless language could do. "Richard," he said finally, "this is very broad. It gives Ethan authority to make almost any financial decision on your behalf if he believes you're unable to manage your own affairs." but I am managing my own affairs. According to these documents, that's his judgment to make, not yours. Marcus set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. The question is whether he's already started using this authority. What do you mean? I mean, we need to check your credit report, your bank accounts, and your property records. If someone's been making inquiries about liens or encumbrances, it's possible they've already taken some preliminary steps. The drive back home felt longer than usual, Marcus's words echoing in my head. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a new possibility had settled in my chest like a weight. What if Ethan hadn't just brought Crawford to evaluate my options? What if he'd brought him to finalize arrangements that were already in motion? I went straight to my study and pulled out the filing cabinet again. Everything looked normal: bank statements, insurance policies, investment accounts. But as I went through each document, I noticed something that made my hands shake. The most recent property tax statement wasn't addressed to me alone. It was addressed to Richard Dalton and Ethan Dalton, joint tenants. Joint tenants. I'd never agreed to add Ethan's name to the deed. I called Marcus immediately. "Richard, slow down. Tell me exactly what you're looking at." I read him the property tax statement word for word. "That's not good," Marcus said. "Someone's filed paperwork to add Ethan as a joint owner. We need to get to the county recorder's office first thing Monday morning and see what documents were filed." "How is that possible without my signature?" "With a broad power of attorney, it might not require your signature. If Ethan claimed you were incapacitated or needed assistance managing your affairs, he could potentially make the change himself." The room tilted slightly around me. "So he owns half my house now?" "Potentially. But Richard, listen to me. If this was done improperly or without proper justification, we can challenge it. The question is whether you're prepared for what that might mean." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if Ethan's been making financial decisions without your knowledge or consent, this isn't just about the house. This could be about everything: your bank accounts, your investments, your entire estate." That evening, I sat on the porch where Caroline and I had spent so many summer evenings, watching the light fade from the sky and trying to understand how my life had become something other people could rearrange without asking my permission. The maple tree she'd planted when Ethan was born stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its leaves rustling in the October breeze. She'd been so proud when he took his first steps in this yard, so excited when he learned to ride his bike on this driveway. I wondered what she would think if she could see him now, using legal documents to take control of the life we'd built together. The phone rang inside the house, but I didn't move to answer it. Whatever Ethan wanted to explain or justify could wait until Monday, when Marcus and I would find out exactly what had been done in my name and without my knowledge. For now, I sat in the gathering darkness and tried to remember when my son had stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an obstacle to be managed. The answer, like so many things these days, was harder to find than it should have been. My son hid a mortgage secret for years. What I did next left him speechless in front of all. Part 3. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sharp October cold that cuts through your jacket and settles in your bones. I was dressed and ready by 7, but the county recorder's office didn't open until 8:30. I spent the extra time in my garage, not working on anything in particular, just needing the comfort of familiar tools and the smell of motor oil. Marcus picked me up at 8:15 in his immaculate Lincoln Continental, the same car he'd driven for the past 15 years. He believed in maintaining things properly rather than replacing them, a philosophy that had guided both his law practice and his life. "You sleep at all?" he asked as I settled into the passenger seat. "Some." It was a lie, but Marcus didn't need to carry the weight of my sleepless night along with everything else. The county building sat downtown, like a monument to bureaucracy, all concrete and small windows that seemed designed to discourage visitors. Marcus navigated the maze of hallways with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades dealing with government offices. The clerk at the recorder's office was a young woman with tired eyes and the patient expression of someone accustomed to explaining the same procedures dozens of times a day. Marcus handed her a request form he'd filled out in advance. "We need to see all recorded documents for this property address for the past 6 months, he said. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thick folder. "You can use table 3 over there. Just bring them back when you're finished." My hands trembled slightly as Marcus spread the documents across the scratched table. Most were routine: annual assessments, tax adjustments, the kinds of paperwork that accumulate around any property over time. But near the bottom of the stack, I saw something that made my chest tighten. A quitclaim deed dated 3 months ago, transferring half ownership of my property from me to Ethan. My signature was at the bottom of the page, witnessed and notarized, except I'd never signed it. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I never signed this." He studied the signature with the careful attention of a man who'd seen enough forged documents to recognize the signs. "It's a good approximation," he said finally, "but you're right, this isn't your signature." "How can you tell?" "The pressure's wrong. Your real signature has these little hesitations where you lift the pen slightly. This one's too smooth, like someone traced it." Marcus pulled out his phone and took several photographs of the document. "We're going to need a handwriting expert, but my guess is someone practiced your signature until they could reproduce it well enough to fool a notary." I stared at my name on the bottom of the page, at the date that marked the moment my son had decided to steal half my house. 3 months ago, while I was still bringing him dinner on Sundays and asking about his work, he was forging my signature on legal documents. "What about the notary?" I asked. "Wouldn't they have required me to be present?" Marcus flipped through the attached pages until he found the notarization. "Marlene Vickers, mobile notary. Says here she witnessed your signature at your home address." He looked up at me. "You remember anyone named Marlene coming to your house?" "Never seen her before in my life." "Then we have them. Notarizing a signature without the principal present is a felony. If we can prove you weren't there, and we can, with your bank records, grocery receipts, anything showing you were somewhere else that day, then the whole transaction becomes void." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something colder. "Marcus, if Ethan forged this deed, what else has he done?" We spent the next hour going through every document in the file. Marcus made copies of everything while I tried to process the scope of what my son had done. The quitclaim deed was just the beginning. There was also a mortgage application, filed 2 weeks after the deed transfer, using the property as collateral for a loan of $250,000. The application listed both Ethan and me as borrowers, though I'd never seen the paperwork before this moment. "Jesus," Marcus muttered, studying the mortgage documents. "Richard, according to this, you owe $250,000 secured by your house. That's impossible. The house has been paid off for 15 years. "Not anymore." Marcus spread the loan documents across the table. "Someone took out a mortgage against the property using both names on the deed. The money was dispersed to an account listed under Ethan's business name." The room felt like it was tilting. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "So, he stole my house and mortgaged it?" "Essentially, yes. Though legally, since his name was on the deed at the time, the mortgage appears legitimate." Marcus gathered the papers with grim efficiency. "Richard, we need to move fast on this. If Ethan's in financial trouble, and borrowing this much money suggests he is, he might be planning additional transactions." We drove back to Marcus's office in silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what we'd discovered. I kept thinking about the conversations I'd had with Ethan over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. The expensive clothes he'd been wearing, the new truck, Madison's talk about a vacation to Europe they were planning, all funded apparently by a mortgage on my house that I'd never agreed to. In Marcus's office, he made coffee while I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and tried to understand how my life had been rearranged without my knowledge or consent. "Here's what we're going to do," Marcus said, settling behind his desk with a legal pad. "First, we file a complaint with the police about the forged signature. Second, we petition the court to void the quitclaim deed based on fraud. Third, we demand that the mortgage company freeze any further disbursements from the loan. How long will all that take? Weeks, maybe months. Legal proceedings move slowly, especially when there's this much money involved." Marcus leaned forward. "Richard, you need to understand something. Ethan's not going to just accept this quietly. If he's borrowed money against your house, he's probably made commitments based on that cash flow. Canceling the mortgage could put him in serious financial trouble. That's not my problem." "No, but it might become your problem if he gets desperate." Marcus pulled out another form and began filling it out. I'm also going to recommend that we revoke that power of attorney immediately. Whatever trust you had in Ethan's judgment, he's proven that trust was misplaced. The rest of the morning was spent on paperwork, forms to file with the court, documents to submit to the mortgage company, complaints to lodge with various agencies. Each signature I provided felt like taking back a small piece of control over my own life. By noon, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Marcus drove me home and walked me to the door like I was an invalid, which, in some ways, I supposed I was. "Richard," he said before leaving, "don't confront Ethan about this yet. Let me handle the legal filing first. If he knows we're on to him, he might try to take additional action before we can stop him." "What kind of additional action?" "Hard to say, but desperate people make desperate choices." Marcus gripped my shoulder. "Just be careful, and call me if anything seems off." Inside my house, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table where Caroline and I had made so many decisions together. The mortgage papers Marcus had copied were spread before me, each page a testament to how thoroughly my son had betrayed my trust. I thought about Caroline's last words to me, whispered in the hospital room where she'd spent her final weeks. "Take care of Ethan," she'd said. "He's going to need guidance." I'd taken those words seriously, maybe too seriously. I'd given him the power of attorney because Caroline had asked me to look after him. I'd trusted him with authority over my affairs because I thought that's what being a good father meant. But Caroline had also said something else in those final days, something I'd forgotten until now. "Don't let anyone take advantage of your grief, Richard, not even family." The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Ethan's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it ring. He called back an hour later, then again that evening. Each time I watched his name appear on the display and made the deliberate choice not to answer. I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet, not until I'd figured out what I was going to say. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock at my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Ethan standing on my porch, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Dad, I've been trying to call you all day. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look upset about something." His eyes searched my face with what might have been genuine concern, or might have been calculation. Did something happen? I could have confronted him then. I could have pulled out the mortgage papers and demanded an explanation. Instead, I found myself studying his face, looking for traces of the boy who used to help me work on cars in the garage, who used to sit on this same porch and tell me about his dreams for the future. "I had some business to take care of today," I said finally. "Legal business." Something flickered across his expression, too quick to identify, but real enough to confirm what I already knew. "Legal business? Is everything okay with your will or the insurance?" "Everything's fine, Ethan. I'm just making sure all my affairs are in order." He nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight shifted from foot to foot. "That's good, Dad. That's smart. Hey, did you give any more thought to what Crawford discussed yesterday? The equity arrangement?" "I'm still considering my options." "Right, of course. It's a big decision." He paused, studying my face. "Dad, you'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? If you needed help with anything?" The irony was so thick I could taste it. My son, who had forged my signature and mortgaged my house without my knowledge, asking if I needed help. "I'd tell someone," I said, "when the time comes." After he left, I deadbolted the door and turned off the porch light. Tomorrow, Marcus would begin the legal process of undoing what Ethan had done. Papers would be filed, complaints would be lodged, investigations would begin. But tonight, I sat in my living room and grieved for the son I'd thought I had, the one who would never have looked me in the eye while stealing my home. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, marking another day in what had become the strangest chapter of my life. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows Caroline had chosen so carefully, the ones that had given us such a perfect view of the maple tree she'd planted when our son was born. Some things, I was learning, grew in ways you never expected, and not all of that growth was good. My son hid a mortgage secret for years, what I did. Next left him speechless. In front of all Part 4. The call came at 7:30 the next morning, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in days. Marcus's voice carried an urgency that made me fully awake before my feet hit the floor. "Richard, we have a problem. The mortgage company received a request yesterday afternoon to accelerate the disbursement schedule. Someone wants the remaining loan funds released immediately. I gripped the phone tighter. How much money are we talking about? Another $120,000. According to the paperwork, it's for emergency home repairs and medical expenses. Marcus paused. Richard, did you request any emergency funds? I didn't even know there was money to request. Then Ethan's making another move. If he gets that cash, it'll be much harder to recover, even if we prove the original mortgage was fraudulent. I sank into Caroline's chair by the kitchen window, watching the morning light paint familiar shadows across her garden. How do we stop it? I'm filing an emergency injunction this morning. But, Richard, courts move slowly and banks move fast. We might be too late. After Marcus hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and tried to understand how my life had become a race against my own son. Every hour I waited gave him another opportunity to steal from me. Every legal procedure that protected my rights also gave him time to cover his tracks. The doorbell rang at 8:15. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a business suit holding a clipboard and a manila envelope. Behind her stood a man in overalls with County Assessor embroidered on his shirt. I opened the door, but kept the chain latch engaged. Mr. Dalton, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Heritage Financial Services. We need to conduct a property assessment for insurance purposes related to your recent loan modification. I didn't modify any loan. She consulted her clipboard with practiced efficiency. According to our records, you and your son submitted a request yesterday for accelerated disbursement based on urgent repair needs. We just need to document the property condition to process the request. The man in overalls stepped forward. Won't take long, sir. Just need to check the foundation, electrical, plumbing. Standard procedure for large disbursements. I closed the door and called Marcus from the hallway phone. Don't let them in, he said immediately. That's not a legitimate assessment. It's a way to create documentation that makes the loan modification look justified. What do I tell them? Tell them all property inspections are suspended pending legal review. If they argue, tell them to contact your attorney. Marcus's voice sharpened. Richard, this confirms what I suspected. Ethan's not just stealing money. He's creating a paper trail that makes it look legitimate. When I returned to the door, the woman was talking quietly into her phone while the assessor measured something near the foundation with a metal tape. I'm sorry, I said through the door. All property inspections are suspended pending legal review. You'll need to contact my attorney. The woman looked up sharply. Mr. Dalton, this is just a formality. We can't process your loan modification without the assessment. I didn't request a loan modification. She exchanged glances with the assessor. Sir, according to our paperwork, both you and Ethan Dalton submitted the request yesterday afternoon. Are you saying that's not accurate? I'm saying you need to leave my property, now. They packed up their equipment with obvious reluctance, the woman making more phone calls as they walked back to their van. I watched from the window until they drove away, then called Marcus again. They're gone, but they seemed pretty surprised that I didn't know about the loan modification. Because whoever's running this operation told them you were a willing participant. Richard, I hate to say this, but I think your son's involved with some very sophisticated people. This isn't just family greed, this is organized fraud. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and legal documents. Marcus filed the emergency injunction, while I gathered every piece of paperwork related to my property and finances. By noon, my kitchen table looked like a war room, covered with bank statements, insurance policies, and property records. That's when I found the second mortgage. It was buried in a stack of mail I'd been meaning to sort. A notice from a different lender about a home equity line of credit that had been opened in my name 3 weeks ago. The available credit limit was $100,000, and according to the statement, $15,000 had already been accessed. I called Marcus immediately. Jesus Christ, he muttered after I read him the details. Richard, they've turned your house into a cash machine. First the big mortgage, now a home equity line. How much equity did you have in the property? The house was appraised at $400,000 last year for insurance purposes. It's been paid off for 15 years. So you had $400,000 in equity, and they've already borrowed or committed to borrow most of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Richard, I need you to go to your bank right now and freeze all your accounts. If they have your financial information, they might try to access your cash assets too. The drive to First National Bank felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. I'd banked there for 30 years, knew most of the tellers by name, had celebrated with the staff when Caroline and I finally paid off our mortgage. Now, I was walking in to protect myself from my own son. Janet Morrison, the branch manager, had handled our accounts since Caroline was alive. She welcomed me with the warm smile I remembered, but her expression grew serious as I explained what I needed. "Richard, this is highly unusual. Are you sure you want to freeze everything? That includes your checking account, savings, even your credit cards?" "I'm sure." She pulled up my accounts on her computer, frowning at something on the screen. "Richard, I'm showing some recent activity that might interest you. 3 large wire transfers from your savings account over the past 2 weeks. My stomach dropped. "How large?" $15,000 each, all authorized using your online banking credentials. Janet turned the screen so I could see the transaction history. The transfers went to an account listed under Dalton Construction Services. "Is that one of your businesses?" I'd never heard of Dalton Construction Services, but Ethan had apparently been busy. "Janet, I need those transactions reversed immediately, and I want a complete investigation into how my online banking was accessed." "Of course, I'll start the paperwork right now." Janet's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Richard, between you and me, you should also know that someone called yesterday asking about increasing your daily withdrawal limits. Said you were planning a large cash purchase." "I never called." "I figured as much. That's why I told them any limit changes would require you to come in person with proper identification." Janet printed out several forms and slid them across the desk. "Whoever's doing this, they're not amateurs. They know your account numbers, your online passwords, probably your social security number too." As I signed the paperwork to freeze my accounts, I tried to process how thoroughly my son had prepared to rob me. He hadn't just forged one document, he'd created an entire false identity, complete with business accounts and online access to my personal finances. By the time I left the bank, it was clear that this wasn't a simple case of family greed or poor judgment. This was a systematic operation designed to strip me of everything I owned while making it look like legitimate business transactions. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. Ethan again. This time, I answered. "Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day." His voice carried a panic I'd never heard before. "There's been some kind of mix-up with the bank. They're saying there are problems with the construction loan we applied for." Construction loan. Not mortgage modification, not home equity line, but construction loan. He was trying to see how much I knew. "What construction loan would that be, Ethan?" "The one we discussed for the house renovations. Remember? You said you wanted to update the kitchen and maybe add that sunroom Mom always talked about." Caroline had never talked about a sunroom. She'd loved the house exactly as it was. "I don't recall that conversation." "Dad, we talked about it last month. You said the house needed some work to maintain its value, and I said I'd help you navigate the loan process." His voice was getting higher, more strained. "Don't you remember?" "I remember a lot of things, Ethan. But I also remember that my lawyer found some very interesting documents at the county recorder's office yesterday." The silence that followed lasted so long, I thought he might have hung up. "Dad," he said finally, his voice much quieter, "I think there might be some misunderstandings here. Maybe we should sit down and go through everything together." "I think that's a good idea. Why don't you come over tonight, bring Madison, and bring all the paperwork related to any loans or mortgages you've taken out in my name." "In your name? Dad, I haven't—" "Bring the paperwork, Ethan, all of it." I hung up before he could respond, then sat in my truck in the driveway of the house I'd thought I owned free and clear, trying to prepare myself for a conversation that would determine whether I had a son or just a very sophisticated thief who happened to share my DNA. The afternoon sun slanted through the maple tree Caroline had planted, casting the same shadows I'd watched for 32 years. But everything else about my life had changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. Marcus called at 4 o'clock with news that the emergency injunction had been granted, temporarily freezing all loan disbursements until the court could review the case. It was a victory, but it felt like winning a single battle in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. "Richard," Marcus said, "there's something else you should know. I did some research on that mobile notary who supposedly witnessed your signature. Marlene Vickers has been under investigation by the state for fraudulent notarizations. She's apparently part of a larger network that specializes in real estate fraud. So, This isn't just Ethan. No, it's not. Your son got involved with some very bad people, and now they're all in too deep to back out quietly. Marcus paused. Richard, I want you to be very careful tonight. If Ethan's as desperate as I think he is, there's no telling what he might do when he realizes his scheme is falling apart. As darkness fell, I turned on every light in the house and waited for my son to arrive, with explanations I knew would be lies, and paperwork that would reveal the full scope of his betrayal. But I was done being the victim in this story. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms, in my house, with the truth finally dragged into the light where everyone could see it. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. The reckoning had begun. My son hit a mortgage. Secret for years, what I did next left him speechless. In front of all Part 5. The headlights swept across my living room window like a lighthouse beam, casting moving shadows on the walls Caroline had painted herself 20 years ago. I didn't move from my chair at the kitchen table, surrounded by the documents Marcus and I had copied that morning. Let them knock, let them wait. This was still my house, at least until the courts decided otherwise. The knock came, tentative at first, then more insistent. Through the front door's frosted glass, I could see 2 figures, Ethan and Madison, standing close together like people bracing against a storm. I opened the door without stepping back to invite them in. Dad? Ethan's smile was too bright, too forced. Thanks for agreeing to meet. I think once we go through everything, we can clear up these misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. As if forging my signature was a simple miscommunication. Madison stood slightly behind him, clutching a leather portfolio against her chest. She'd dressed for the occasion, business casual, professional makeup, the armor of someone preparing for battle disguised as a business meeting. Come in, I said, finally stepping aside. Let's get this over with. They settled at my kitchen table like they were attending a PTA meeting, Madison arranging papers with nervous precision, while Ethan maintained that artificial smile. The overhead light was harsh, unforgiving, showing every line of tension in their faces. So, Ethan began, I brought all the documentation you asked for. I think you'll see that everything was done properly with your best interest in mind. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the same documents I'd seen at the county recorder's office, plus several others I hadn't seen before. Loan applications, property assessments, something called a financial hardship affidavit that supposedly documented my inability to maintain the property without assistance. This financial hardship affidavit, I said, reading from the document. It says I'm struggling with medical expenses and home maintenance costs. It's signed with my name. Well, yes, Dad, you have been struggling, even if you won't admit it. The house is too big, too expensive for someone on a fixed income. We were just trying to help you access the equity to make your life easier. By forging my signature, Madison leaned forward, her voice soft with practiced sympathy. Richard, I know this feels overwhelming, but everything we did was legal. You signed a power of attorney giving Ethan authority to make financial decisions on your behalf. When I was incapacitated, the document doesn't specify that limitation, she said smoothly. It gives Ethan broad discretionary power to act in your best interests when you're unable or unwilling to make necessary financial decisions yourself. Unable or unwilling, the words hung in the air like smoke. So you decided I was unwilling to make smart choices about my own money. Ethan's smile faltered. Dad, you've been isolated since Mom died. You don't understand how property values have changed, how the market works now. We were trying to help you take advantage of opportunities. What opportunities? Madison opened her portfolio and pulled out a glossy brochure. Heritage Financial Services specializes in helping elderly homeowners unlock their equity while remaining in their homes. It's called a reverse equity partnership. I looked into Heritage Financial Services, I said quietly. They're under investigation by the State Banking Commission for predatory lending practices. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ethan and Madison exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Dad, where are you getting this information? From my lawyer, the one I hired after I discovered someone had been forging my signature on legal documents. Madison's professional composure slipped for the first time. Richard, I think there's been a misunderstanding. All the signatures were properly witnessed and notarized. By Marlene Vickers, who's under criminal investigation for fraudulent notarizations. Now it was Ethan who lost his composure. His face flushed, and when he spoke, his voice was higher, more defensive. Dad, you're being paranoid. Just because someone's under investigation doesn't mean they did anything wrong. True, but it does mean the documents she notarized are suspect. I pulled out the copies Marcus had made and spread them across the table. Like this quitclaim deed that supposedly transfers half my property to you, the one I never signed. You did sign it. You were having one of your episodes. What episodes? The confusion episodes. The times when you get disoriented, forget conversations we've had. Madison and I have been worried about your mental state for months. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who nodded with concerned sympathy. It's been very frightening, Richard. Some days you seem completely normal, but other days you repeat yourself, forget what we've discussed, seem confused about basic facts. They'd planned this part too. Not just the financial fraud, but the character assassination that would justify it. In their version of events, I wasn't a victim of theft. I was a declining old man whose family had taken responsible action to protect my assets. Interesting theory, I said. Here's another theory. You and Ethan needed money, probably a lot of money, and you decided my house was the easiest place to get it. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not true. Then explain this. I pulled out the bank statements Janet had given me. 3 wire transfers from my savings account, $15,000 each, to something called Dalton Construction Services. I've never heard of this company, never authorized these transfers. Dalton Construction is my business, Ethan said quickly. I'm doing the renovation work on the house. Those payments were for materials and labor. What renovation work? The foundation repairs, the electrical updates. Dad, we've discussed this multiple times. You keep forgetting. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where Caroline's garden was settling into its autumn dormancy. Behind me, I could hear Ethan and Madison whispering urgently to each other. You know what's interesting? I said without turning around. I've lived in this house for 32 years. I know every board, every pipe, every wire. And there's nothing wrong with the foundation, the electrical, or anything else. Dad, you're not qualified to assess structural issues. That's why we brought in professionals. I turned back to face them. What professionals? I've been here every day for the past 6 months. No contractors, no workers, no one doing any kind of renovation. Madison's voice took on the patient tone people use with difficult children. Richard, I think your memory issues are more serious than you want to admit. Perhaps we should schedule an appointment with Dr. Phillips to discuss your cognitive health. Dr. Phillips was my family physician, the man who'd pronounced me mentally and physically sound just 3 months ago during my annual checkup. But I understood the threat implicit in Madison's suggestion. Submit to our version of events, or we'll have you declared incompetent. Actually, I said, I think it's time we brought in some other professionals, people trained to investigate financial fraud. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Dad, you're making a mistake. If you involve law enforcement in what's essentially a family misunderstanding, you could cause serious problems for everyone. Everyone meaning you. Everyone meaning all of us. Do you have any idea what kind of scrutiny this will bring? The lawyers, the investigators, the publicity? Is that really what you want for Mom's memory? Using Caroline's memory as emotional blackmail was a new low, even for him. Your mother would want me to protect what we built together. She wouldn't want our sons stealing it piece by piece. Madison gathered her papers with sharp, efficient movements. I think we should continue this conversation when you're feeling more rational, Richard. Right now, you're clearly agitated and not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly enough to know when I'm being robbed. Ethan moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Dad, you need to understand something. The money's already been spent. The loans are legitimate, even if you don't remember authorizing them. If you try to unwind this, you could lose everything. What's that supposed to mean? It means the bank doesn't care about family disputes. They want their money back with interest. If you challenge the loans and can't pay, they'll foreclose on the house. You'll end up with nothing. Madison nodded gravely. We're trying to protect you from that outcome, Richard. The equity partnership we arranged ensures you can stay in the house while the financial obligations are managed professionally. Professionally? by Heritage Financial Services, the company under investigation for predatory lending. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, get out of my house. Both of you. They left with wounded dignity, Madison making a show of helping Ethan gather papers while casting concerned glances in my direction, as if I were the unreasonable one, as if protecting my own property from the theft was a sign of mental instability. After their car pulled away, I sat in the quiet kitchen and tried to process everything they had revealed. The scope of their planning was staggering. Forged documents, fraudulent businesses, character assassination, even threats of foreclosure if I didn't cooperate. But they had also revealed something else. They were scared. The careful facade of concerned family members had cracked under pressure, showing the desperation underneath. People this desperate made mistakes, and mistakes could be exploited. I called Marcus at home, something I'd never done before. Richard, everything all right? They just left. Marcus, it's worse than we thought. I told him about the conversation, the threats, the suggestion that I was mentally incompetent. Son of a bitch, Marcus muttered. They're trying to gaslight you into accepting the theft, make you think you're losing your mind so you won't fight back. What's our next move? Tomorrow morning, we file a police report. This isn't just civil fraud anymore. It's criminal conspiracy. And Richard, start documenting everything. Every phone call, every conversation, every threat. If they're planning to have you declared incompetent, we need evidence that you're thinking clearly and remembering accurately. After Marcus hung up, I walked through my house, seeing it with new eyes. Every room told the story of the life Caroline and I had built together. But now I understood it was also evidence in a case that would determine whether that life had been worth protecting. In our bedroom, I opened Caroline's jewelry box and pulled out the small digital recorder I'd bought her years ago to help with her garden club minutes. She'd never used it much, but it still worked. Tomorrow, I would begin documenting everything. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt to manipulate or intimidate me. If Ethan and Madison wanted to play games with my memory and mental state, they were about to discover that this old man still had some fight left in him. But tonight, I sat in Caroline's chair by the kitchen window and grieved for the son I'd lost, the one who used to bring her wildflowers from the back meadow and tell us about his dreams for the future. That boy was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw his father's home as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. The reckoning was just beginning. My son hid a mortgage secret for years. What I did next to left him speechless. In front of all part 6. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant, a combination that reminded me of the VA hospital where I'd spent too many hours after Caroline's diagnosis. Detective Sarah Chen looked younger than my grandson would have been, but her eyes carried the tired wisdom of someone who'd seen enough lies to recognize truth when it walked through her door. Mr. Dalton, she said, settling behind a metal desk scarred by decades of use. Tell me about these forged documents. I spread Marcus's copies across her desk. The quitclaim deed, the mortgage applications, the fraudulent wire transfers. Each page represented another layer of my son's betrayal, another piece of the life Caroline and I had built that he'd tried to steal. The signatures aren't mine, I said. I never agreed to any of these transactions. Detective Chen studied the documents with the careful attention of someone trained to spot deception. The forgeries are pretty sophisticated. Whoever did this had access to examples of your real signature and practiced until they could reproduce it convincingly. My son would have had that access. Ethan Dalton listed as co-borrower on several of these loans. She made notes on a yellow pad. What's your relationship with your son been like recently? I told her about the visits from Crawford and Heritage Financial Services, the pressure to sell or mortgage the house, last night's confrontation. She listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or amounts. Mr. Dalton, I have to ask this directly. Have you been having any memory problems, confusion, anything that might support their claim that you authorized these transactions but don't remember? Detective, 3 months ago, my doctor pronounced me mentally and physically sound. I remember every detail of my wife's illness, every conversation I've had with my son, every decision I've made about my property. If I was having memory problems, would I be sitting here with organized documentation and a clear timeline of events? She smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. Good point. Mr. Dalton, based on what you've shown me, I think we have enough for a preliminary investigation. But I want to warn you, this kind of case can get complicated fast, especially when family members are involved. How complicated? Your son's going to lawyer up the moment he knows we're investigating. If he's working with an organized fraud ring, they'll have exit strategies planned. And if there's as much money involved as these documents suggest, people might get desperate. Marcus met me in the station parking lot, his Lincoln Continental idling in the cold October air. How did it go? She's opening an investigation, but she thinks Ethan's involved with professionals. That matches what I found this morning. Marcus handed me a manila folder. I did some research on Heritage Financial Services. They are part of a network that targets elderly homeowners with significant property equity. The pattern is always the same. Identify vulnerable targets, gain their trust, then systematically strip their assets using fraudulent documents. I opened the folder and found newspaper clippings, court records, police reports, story after story of elderly people who'd lost their homes to the same kind of sophisticated fraud Ethan had used against me. Marcus, how many victims are we talking about? In the past 2 years, at least 15 in this state alone. Most of them never recovered their property. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward downtown. Richard, there's something else. I called Heritage Financial this morning, pretending to be interested in their services. The woman I spoke with mentioned they were having a client appreciation dinner this weekend at the Marriott downtown. So I think your son and Madison will be there, along with their handlers. It might be our chance to see exactly who we're dealing with. The idea of watching Ethan celebrate his theft of my property made my stomach turn. But Marcus was right. If we were going to fight this, we needed to understand the full scope of the operation. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we crash their party, with recording equipment. That afternoon, I sat in my study going through 30 years of financial records, looking for patterns I might have missed. The power of attorney Caroline and I had signed during her illness was broader than I'd remembered, giving Ethan authority over almost every aspect of my financial life. But there was a clause I'd forgotten about, buried in the legal language. The power of attorney was supposed to be activated only by a doctor's certification that I was unable to manage my own affairs. No such certification existed in my files. I called Dr. Phillips's office. "Mr. Dalton," his nurse said, "I have your file right here. Your last visit was 3 months ago for your annual physical. Dr. Phillips noted that you were in excellent health for your age, both physically and mentally. Did anyone ever request a mental competency evaluation for me? Let me check. No, I don't see any requests like that. Did you need to schedule one? No, thank you. I was just confirming." After I hung up, I made a note on the legal pad I'd started keeping. Power of attorney activated without medical certification. Violation of document terms. The small recorder Caroline had used for her garden club meetings sat on the desk beside me, testing it periodically to make sure it still worked. Tomorrow, I would start documenting every conversation, every phone call, every attempt to manipulate or intimidate me. My phone rang just after 5 o'clock. Ethan's name on the caller ID. I pressed record before answering. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation last night. I'm worried you're making decisions based on incomplete information." "What kind of incomplete information?" "Well, the financial obligations associated with the property improvements. Dad, whether you remember authorizing them or not, the work's been done and the bills need to be paid." "What work, Ethan? I haven't seen any contractors, any materials, any evidence of improvement to this house." "The work was done while you were at your medical appointments. We arranged it that way so you wouldn't be disturbed by the noise and disruption." Medical appointments? I'd had one doctor's visit in the past 6 months, my annual physical. "Which medical appointments?" "Your cardiac follow-ups, the neurological testing. Dad, don't you remember? Dr. Phillips referred you to a specialist because of concerns about your memory and cognitive function. It was a lie, elaborate and specific. If I hadn't called Dr. Phillips's office that afternoon, I might have started doubting my own recollections. Ethan, I never had neurological testing. I never saw a specialist. Dr. Phillips never expressed any concerns about my cognitive function." Silence on the other end of the line. "Dad, I think you should speak with Dr. Phillips again. These memory gaps are getting worse. The only gap in my memory is how I raised a son who could lie to me so easily. I'm trying to help you. We all are. But if you keep fighting us, there's only so much we can do to protect you. Protect me from what? From the consequences of the financial decisions that have already been made. Dad, the money's gone. It's been spent on legitimate expenses. If you force the bank to call in the loans, you'll lose the house. The threat was clearer this time, less subtle. Submit to our version of events or lose everything. I'll take my chances with the bank. Don't do this, Dad. Don't destroy the family over money. I'm not destroying anything, Ethan. I'm protecting what your mother and I built together. After he hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness and listened to the recording. His voice was calm, reasonable, concerned. Exactly the tone a loving son would use with a confused father. If someone heard only this conversation, they might conclude that I was indeed having memory problems and that my family was trying to help. But I had the documentation. I had Dr. Phillips's records. I had the timeline that proved Ethan's story was fabricated from beginning to end. Marcus called that evening to confirm our plan for Saturday night. I've reserved a table at the restaurant adjacent to the Marriott's conference center. We should be able to observe the Heritage Financial event without being noticed. What if Ethan sees me? Then we'll know for certain he's working with them. Right now, we have strong suspicions, but no direct proof he's part of the organized operation. Friday passed quietly, almost ominously so. No phone calls from Ethan, no unexpected visitors, no new financial surprises. I spent the day organizing my documentation, making sure every piece of evidence was properly labeled and copied. Late in the afternoon, I drove past the house where Ethan and Madison lived, a modest colonial in a neighborhood of young families. Ethan's truck sat in the driveway beside Madison's sedan, both vehicles newer and more expensive than anything I remembered them owning before. 2 children played in the front yard, neighbors I assumed, since Ethan and Madison had no kids. The scene looked peaceful, ordinary, like the kind of suburban tableau Caroline and I had once dreamed of for our son. It was hard to reconcile that image with the man who'd forged my signature and stolen my house. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that reminded me of high school football games and Halloween costumes, back when October meant simple pleasures instead of legal battles. I dressed carefully, the navy suit Caroline had bought me for church. The tie she'd said brought out my eyes. If I was going to confront the people who'd tried to steal my life, I wanted to look like a man worth respecting. Marcus picked me up at 6:30, both of us quiet during the drive downtown. The Marriott's parking lot was full of expensive cars, Mercedes sedans, BMW SUVs, the kind of vehicles that suggested their owners were doing very well financially. Quite a successful operation, Marcus observed as we walked toward the restaurant. Built on stolen houses. The restaurant was dimly lit, designed for intimate conversations and discreet business dealings. Our table offered a clear view of the conference center entrance, where well-dressed couples were arriving for what looked like any other corporate social event. At 7:15, I saw them. Ethan and Madison emerged from a silver Lexus I'd never seen before, both dressed like they were attending a country club gala. Madison wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Ethan looked comfortable, confident, like a man celebrating a successful business venture, which I supposed he was. They entered the conference center with the easy familiarity of people who belonged there, stopping to chat with other couples, shaking hands with men in expensive suits. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I think we have our proof." He was already taking photographs with his phone. "Richard, your son isn't just involved with Heritage Financial Services. He's one of their star performers." We watched for another hour as more couples arrived, each one looking prosperous and satisfied. This wasn't a support group for struggling homeowners. It was a celebration for the people who'd figured out how to profit from their struggles. As we prepared to leave, I saw Gerald and Patricia Monroe arrive in a black Mercedes. Caroline's parents had never owned a car that expensive, but apparently their participation in my son's schemes had been profitable. "The whole family's involved," I said. "Looks that way. Richard, tomorrow we take everything we've gathered to Detective Chen. With these photographs and your recorded conversations, we should have enough for arrest warrants." The drive home was quiet, both of us processing what we'd witnessed. My son wasn't just a troubled young man who'd made poor choices. He was a criminal who targeted his own father with the same methodical planning he'd probably used against strangers. But seeing him at that celebration had crystallized something for me. This wasn't about money anymore, or even about justice. This was about making sure he understood that some people couldn't be stolen from, manipulated, or discarded when they became inconvenient. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of brilliant October light that made everything look sharper, more defined. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the Sunday paper, but my mind was on the conversation I needed to have with Detective Chen. The photographs Marcus had taken, the recorded phone calls, the documentation of systematic fraud. All of it was spread across the table, like pieces of a puzzle that finally made a complete picture. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Madison's name on the caller ID. I pressed record. Richard, her voice was strained, missing its usual professional polish. We need to talk. Ethan and I are coming over. I don't think that's a good idea. Richard, please. There are things you don't understand, complications that could affect everyone in the family. Complications. Another word that had taken on new meaning in the vocabulary of people trying to steal my life. What kind of complications? The kind that could destroy innocent people if this situation isn't handled carefully. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Richard, there are other investors involved now. People who don't understand family dynamics. Other investors. The organized fraud ring Detective Chen had warned me about. That sounds like your problem, not mine. It's everyone's problem if the police get involved. These people have lawyers, Richard. They have resources. If you try to unwind the financial arrangements now, you could end up losing everything in legal fees alone. The threat was more sophisticated this time, wrapped in concern for my welfare, but clearly designed to intimidate me into submission. Madison, let me ask you something. When you married my son, did you plan this from the beginning, or did the opportunity just present itself after Caroline died? The silence stretched so long, I thought she might have hung up. Richard, I don't know what you think you know, but you're making dangerous assumptions about people who've only tried to help you. Help me by forging my signature and stealing my house? Help you by preventing you from making financial mistakes that could leave you homeless and destitute. Her voice sharpened with frustration. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain that property? The taxes alone will bankrupt you within 5 years. Then I'll die bankrupt in my own house instead of comfortable in someone else's pocket. After she hung up, I called Marcus. They're getting desperate, he said after I played him the recording. That reference to other investors confirms what we suspected. Heritage Financial is just the front operation. There's a larger network behind this. What does that mean for us? It means we move fast before they have time to cover their tracks or intimidate witnesses. Marcus paused. Richard, I want you to consider something. These people have committed serious crimes, and when the investigation gets underway, it's going to become very public. Are you prepared for your family business to be front-page news? I looked around the kitchen where Caroline and I had shared 32 years of morning coffee, where we'd planned our future and grieved our losses. She'd always said that the truth was like sunlight, uncomfortable sometimes, but necessary for anything good to grow. I'm prepared. At 11 o'clock, Ethan's truck pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him sit behind the wheel for several minutes, apparently gathering courage for whatever he planned to say. When he finally got out, his movements were sharp, agitated. He knocked once, then used his key to let himself in. Dad, we need to clear the air about some things. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, the recorder running in my shirt pocket. What things would those be? The accusations you've been making, the lawyers you've been talking to. He paced to the window, then back, unable to stand still. Dad, you're playing with fire here. Am I? You don't understand the financial commitments that have been made, the contracts that are already in place. If you try to back out now, there will be consequences. For who? For everyone. Dad, the money from the equity arrangements, it's not just sitting in a bank account. It's been invested, committed to projects that can't be unwound without massive penalties. What projects? Development projects, real estate ventures. Dad, we used your equity as collateral for other investments. Good investments that will benefit the whole family. So there it was. They hadn't just stolen my house. They'd gambled with it, used it as collateral in schemes that could multiply their theft or leave me with nothing. Ethan, let me make sure I understand this. You forged my signature to steal my house, then used my house as collateral to gamble on other people's schemes? It's not gambling. These are solid investments managed by professionals. The same professionals who are under investigation by the State Banking Commission? His face flushed. Dad, you're getting bad information from somewhere. Marcus Lee is an old man who doesn't understand modern financial instruments. Marcus understands fraud when he sees it. Marcus is poisoning your mind against your own family. Ethan stopped pacing and faced me directly. Dad, I'm going to ask you one more time to be reasonable about this. If you force us to unwind these arrangements, you'll lose everything. The house, your savings, probably your pension too. How would I lose my pension? Because it might have to be attached to cover the deficits when the investments are liquidated prematurely. My pension? They'd been planning to steal that too. Ethan, get out of my house. Dad, please, just think about what I'm saying. Think about what Mom would want. Your mother would want me to call the police, which is exactly what I'm going to do. His expression changed, the mask of concerned son finally slipping completely. What I saw underneath was cold, calculating, desperate. You call the police, and you'll destroy more than just my life. Madison's parents are involved. Her whole family could go to prison because you're too stubborn to accept help. Good. He left without another word, but I could see him through the window, sitting in his truck, making urgent phone calls. Planning their next move, probably. Deciding how to contain the damage I was about to cause. Detective Chen arrived at my house Monday morning with 2 other officers and a warrant to search Ethan's property. I watched from my porch as the convoy of police cars drove past, heading toward the suburban neighborhood where my son lived his double life. Marcus arrived an hour later with news that the bank had frozen all accounts associated with Heritage Financial Services and that the FBI was taking over the investigation. Richard, this is bigger than we thought. The network they've uncovered involves millions of dollars and dozens of victims across multiple states. What about my house? That's going to take time to sort out. But with the criminal charges being filed, you should be able to void any contracts signed through fraudulent means. Marcus smiled grimly. Your son picked the wrong father to steal from. The arrests came Tuesday afternoon. Ethan, Madison, Gerald, Patricia, and 6 other people associated with Heritage Financial Services, all charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. Detective Chen called to tell me that they'd found evidence of the entire operation in computers seized from Heritage Financial's offices. Lists of targets, forged documents, detailed plans for stealing and liquidating property. Mr. Dalton, your son was what they call a family recruiter. His job was to identify elderly relatives who could be targeted, gain access to their financial information, and facilitate the fraud. He was paid a commission on every successful theft. My son had been paid to steal from me. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold. The maple tree Caroline had planted when Ethan was born stood silhouetted against the light, its leaves beginning their final transformation before winter. Tomorrow, I would begin the legal process of reclaiming my property, my money, my life. Marcus said it could take months, but eventually everything they'd stolen would be returned. But some things couldn't be returned. The trust I'd had in my son, the hope I'd carried that family meant something more than financial opportunity. The belief that the boy who'd once brought Caroline wildflowers would never look me in the eye while planning to steal my home. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Dad? Ethan's voice was small, distant. He was calling from jail. What do you want, Ethan? I want you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. It started as a way to help you, to make sure you'd be taken care of, and then it just got complicated. Complicated. Dad, these people, they don't just let you walk away once you're involved. I tried to stop it, but they said if I didn't cooperate, they'd hurt Madison, hurt her family. Even now, he was lying. Even from jail, he was trying to manipulate me into believing he was a victim instead of a predator. Ethan, the only thing I want to hear from you is an apology, a real one, not another story about how you were forced to steal from me. I am sorry, Dad. I'm sorry for all of it. No, you're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I hung up before he could respond. then unplugged the phone from the wall. Whatever else my son had to say, I didn't need to hear it. The investigation would continue, the trials would proceed, justice would be served in courtrooms and through legal proceedings. I was too old and too tired to care about anymore. But the real ending to this story wasn't about justice or punishment, or even recovering my stolen property. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that some people can't be stolen from, manipulated or discarded when they become inconvenient. I'd protected what Caroline and I had built together. I'd fought for the life we'd chosen and the home we'd created, and I'd won. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, marking another day in a life that was finally completely my own again. Tomorrow, I would start the paperwork to remove Ethan's name from my will to ensure that the house Caroline had loved would go to people who understood its value. But tonight, I sat in the gathering darkness and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The boy who'd once helped me work on cars in the garage was gone, had been gone for years before I'd been willing to admit it. In his place was a stranger who'd seen his father's love as weakness and his mother's memory as something to be monetized. But the house still stood, the maple tree still grew, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between memory and hope, Caroline's voice still whispered that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The fight was over. The home was safe. And for the first time since Caroline died, that was enough. Comment one word that describes how you feel after watching.